Early in the morning, he stepped outside as usual to get the newspaper. The air was still crisp, a lone bird chirping from the rooftop. And yet, not even 10 seconds later, his wife heard a loud thud. She ran out and found him lying motionless beside the front steps, blood on his head, eyes open but vacant. I saw him a few hours later in the emergency room. The first thought that came to me was, did his heart stop? Or did he fall from losing balance? But no, his heart was steady, EKG normal. We did an MRI and measured cerebral perfusion pressure. The results made me shiver. He had just suffered a transient ischemic attack, a temporary blockage of blood flow to a small region of his brain, lasting only seconds. But it was enough to bring down his entire body. As a brain doctor, I've seen many stroke cases, but what shocked me was how quickly and silently this one happened. No clear warning signs. No headache. No loss of consciousness. Just. He stood up a little faster than usual. And I began to wonder how many people out there, over the age of 60, are living with insufficient blood flow to the brain without even knowing it. How many wake up each morning, step out of bed, unknowingly carrying a risk like a ticking time bomb? And could it be that a single, simple action might change that? I went back to speak with his wife. I didn't prescribe medication. I didn't ask him to lift weights or start running. I simply said, we'll begin with one stretching routine, just 3 minutes each morning. Because I knew if we can improve blood flow to the brain, gently open the carotid and neck arteries, then the body has a chance to protect itself from its most dangerous threats. And today, I want to share the exact stretch 5 simple moves. No need to leave your bedroom, but they can help boost blood flow to the brain, keep you more alert, sleep deeper, and most importantly lower your risk of early stroke. I met Mr. Joe on a Monday morning. His face was still smiling, but there was a dullness in his eyes. He was 72 years old, living in Sarasota, Florida. That man used to be a mechanical engineer, steady on his feet, sharp and articulate, and yet that day he walked into the clinic with a wooden cane. I gently asked, "Are you having pain in your leg?" He responded with a light laugh, tinged with embarrassment, "No, doctor. I just had a fall. Nothing serious, really. I just felt a bit faint when I got out of bed. I was going to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but my left leg wouldn't lift. I tried to hold onto the wall, but couldn't keep my balance. I fell, bumped my head on the table. Luckily, no bleeding. I stayed quiet. Just a few simple words, but I heard something much deeper behind that casual tone. It wasn't just a random fall. It was the brain's silent cry for blood, a warning no one had heard. I checked his reflexes, measured orthostatic blood pressure, and evaluated cerebral perfusion. The results were unsurprising. Blood flow pressure to the frontal and lower brainstem regions was below normal in the morning. More precisely, his brain was mildly but chronically underperfused, especially in those first moments after waking. I asked, "Lately, have you been feeling heavy-headed, forgetful, or drowsy during the day?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've been forgetting people's names, and sometimes I stand in the middle of the room and can't remember what I was about to do." I sighed. Not out of frustration with him, but because this was far too common, and most people over 60 simply assume it's just aging, and brush it off. But the problem isn't age. It's that the blood supply to the brain is weakening day by day, and no one's warning them about it. I didn't prescribe medication. I didn't order an MRI right away. I asked for just one thing, "Mr. Joe, tomorrow morning when you wake up, before setting your feet on the ground, sit up, take 3 deep breaths, and do the 5 stretching movements I'm going to show you now. It takes just 3 minutes. But it will awaken the blood flow to your brain that you've been letting sleep in." He looked at me with surprise. I knew he wasn't convinced yet. But he tried. A week later, he came back, his eyes brighter. "Doctor, I never thought just a few neck and shoulder movements could make my head feel this clear. I'm sleeping better. I'm walking more confidently. And most of all, I don't feel like I'm fading anymore." That was when I knew the brain doesn't need us to do too much. It only asks that we remember to wake it up each day with a little care. You know, when Mr. Joe said his mind felt just a bit dim each morning, I understood that wasn't something small. It was the silent cry of brain cells gasping for air, starving for blood. We often don't realize it, but every minute, the brain needs around 750 milliliters of blood more than any other organ. In that blood is oxygen, glucose, the lifeline of every single neuron. But when you sleep, your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, and blood flow to the brain decreases as well. If you stand up right after waking, blood hasn't had time to reach the higher regions like the frontal lobe and brainstem. And even just a few seconds of reduced blood flow can leave your brain in a state of suffocation. Nerve cells aren't like muscles, they don't have a reserve tank. Just 3 to 5 minutes without enough blood, and they begin to weaken, and if it goes on, they start to die. Have you ever forgotten your grandchild's name? Or walked into the kitchen and couldn't remember what you were there for? Maybe that's not aging, maybe your brain is running low on fuel. I once treated Ms. Linda, 68 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from Seattle. She said, "Lately, I feel like a stranger to myself." After examining her, I found no tumors, no visible damage. But blood flow to her frontal lobe was down nearly 30%, a number that made me pause. I asked, "Do you do any light movement in the morning? A short walk, maybe?" She shook her head. She usually stayed in bed longer because she felt tired. And that was exactly when her brain wasn't being awakened. Blood flowed slowly, and her neurons waited in vain for oxygen. I taught her a simple stretch: neck rolls, deep breaths, light forward bends, all without leaving her room. 10 days later, she came back with a notebook in hand, bright eyes, and a steady voice. She said, "I've started writing poetry again. It feels like the blood is flowing all over my head." At that moment, I didn't need to say anything more. I knew that brain was still full of life, it just needed to be gently called awake each morning. Many people ask me, is there an exercise that improves blood flow to the brain without getting out of bed? I usually smile and answer, yes, just 3 minutes every morning. No equipment needed, no heavy effort, just 5 gentle movements. But each of those movements, when done properly, can open up blood pathways that have been blocked for years. First, sit up in bed, keep your back straight, and gently close your eyes. Then, slowly rotate your head in a circular motion, 3 times in each direction. This opens the carotid arteries and awakens the neck and base of the skull. Do it slowly, without rushing. Let each turn be a quiet greeting to your sleeping nervous system. Next, lift both shoulders up high, take a deep breath in, then exhale and let your shoulders drop. It feels like you are literally setting down a heavy load from your neck. Then gently roll your shoulders backward, slowly, imagining the blood flowing around the shoulder joints and up into the back of the neck. Just 3 rotations each side, and you'll feel warmth spreading at the base of your skull. After that, bend your upper body gently forward, let your hands drop toward the floor or your knees, and take 3 deep breaths. This is when the lungs expand, and oxygen-rich blood begins to flow through the upper veins to nourish your brain. Finally, place both hands behind your neck, tilt your head back gently, take a deep breath, hold it for 3 seconds, then exhale slowly. This last movement stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, helping your brain feel calm and alert at the same time. In total, it takes only 3 minutes, but if you do it every morning, you'll start to feel a clear difference. No more wobbling when getting out of bed, no more midday fog, no more heavy-headed discomfort. I always tell my patients, wake your brain before you wake your coffee. And you'll see the day flows lighter, clearer, and with more joy. There are tiny things in the morning that you might overlook, yet they could be making your brain age faster every single day. I'm not talking about disease or age, I'm talking about habits. And sometimes, the most familiar habits are the ones quietly pulling you downhill. The first mistake: getting up and stepping out of bed immediately upon waking. At that moment, your blood is still flowing slowly, and pressure to the brain isn't yet sufficient. When you jump up too quickly, your body hasn't had time to adjust, your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, and you may feel dizzy, or worse. Many people think it's no big deal, but I've seen unpredicted falls happen simply because someone stood up too fast. The second mistake: skipping breakfast or only drinking coffee and diving straight into work. Without stable energy and blood sugar levels, your brain has to function in a fuel-deficient state. That tiredness, irritability, sluggish reactions, they often begin with a skipped breakfast. The third mistake: sitting too long after waking up without moving at all. You think you're resting, but really you're extending the time your circulation remains stagnant. The brain needs to be awakened with gentle movement like the morning stretches I've shared. The fourth mistake: putting too much faith in brain supplements while neglecting real physical care. I once had a patient taking 5 types of brain pills a day, yet she still experienced forgetfulness and headaches. We can't push blood to the brain with pills alone, we need to open the path through intentional morning actions. The final mistake: thinking, I'm still fine, no need to worry. That very feeling of I'm fine is what causes so many people to ignore the first signs. And by the time something happens, slurred speech, a trembling hand, fragmented memory, it's often too late. I say this not to scare you, but to wake you up. You deserve to live with a clear, vibrant mind, and that begins with mindfulness each morning. I'll never forget the first time I met Mrs. Margaret. She was 68, living in Eugene, Oregon, her hair completely white, but her eyes filled with quiet sadness. She walked into the clinic with her daughter, who looked at me and said, "She's not my mom anymore." I turned to Margaret and smiled gently, asking, "How are you feeling?" She hesitated for a moment, then softly said, "I forgot how to make tea. The one I've made every morning." Her voice wasn't sad, it was tired, as if her memory itself was slowly slipping away. I began asking more questions about her sleep, daily routine, and emotions throughout the day. She told me she'd been feeling sleepy during the day, yawning constantly even after a full night's sleep, and occasionally forgetting what she was doing. An MRI showed a clear reduction in blood flow to her frontal lobe and thalamus. Not Alzheimer's, but mild, chronic cerebral hypoperfusion. I asked, "Do you do any light movement in the mornings?" She shook her head. "I usually stay in bed longer because I feel too tired to get up." That very time, lying still, before blood circulates, before the brain is gently awakened, was when everything began to slow down. I didn't prescribe medication. I placed my hand on her shoulder and said, "Try doing this with me just 3 minutes each morning." I guided her through the same stretching routine I'd taught Mr. Joe. Neck rolls, deep breathing, shoulder lifts, gentle forward bends. Each movement slow and calm, as if coaxing the sleeping blood back into motion. She followed along, her hands slightly trembling, but her eyes slowly regaining focus. I told her, "Do this every morning before you get out of bed to wake your brain up with you." 2 weeks later, she called. Her voice was soft, but no longer weary. "Doctor, this morning I remembered the name of the song my husband used to sing." I didn't say a word. Not because of what she said, but because I knew, her brain had just reopened a door. A month later, she came in for a follow-up. No cane, no daughter accompanying her. She walked in, shook my hand, and said, "I was able to write my grandson's birthday card again." That wasn't a miracle. That was a brain being cared for, breathing again, coming back to life. And I believe anyone can do the same. All it takes is giving yourself 3 minutes each morning, just like Margaret did. We've just walked through a short, yet deeply meaningful journey together. From what seemed like a simple fall by Mr. Joe, to the gentle recovery of Mrs. Margaret. You've seen it clearly: when blood doesn't reach the brain sufficiently, it sends signals through fatigue, forgetfulness, imbalance, and sometimes, total collapse. And you've also seen that just 3 minutes of stretching each morning with 5 slow movements, combined with mindful breathing, can reopen blood flow to the brain, awaken memory, improve alertness, and reduce early stroke risk. No medication, no machines, just your willingness to begin, gently, consistently, and with enough belief. I don't believe you're getting weaker. I believe your brain is simply waiting to be awakened through the love you choose to give it each morning. And I believe you deserve a life that's clear, steady, and fully awake. If you found this helpful, click like on the video so I know you're ready to begin. Leave a comment, even just one line. I will try 3 minutes each morning, because speaking it aloud can be the first step toward commitment. And if someone comes to mind, a friend, a loved one, or maybe your partner, share this video with them. You might be saving a night of sleep, a piece of memory, or a shaky step. And if you want to continue this journey with us, hit follow on the Thrive 60+ channel. We're here, every week, to bring you gentle exercises, real-life stories, and non-drug solutions, all dedicated to brain health after age 60. Thank you for staying, for listening, and for choosing to care for yourself, starting tomorrow morning.